Today, we're going to talk about the ever-caring God. And the subtitle here might be a little bit strange because we're actually going to talk about something called the law of destruction, or at least a small part of it that applies a little bit to the times we're going through. So before we proceed, I just want to make sure that I make a little disclaimer that we're going to talk about Spiritism view to some of the events we're going through, and we're going to talk about some general principles and general teachings of the spirits, but by no means we intend to minimize the suffering that individuals might be going through. We understand that everyone experiences these events in a very personal way, and we want to assure everyone that we deeply respect that, and that we deeply respect the actual feelings that each individual goes through in these times, because they're not really the general teachings. They're about the human experience, and we very much recognize and respect that. And we don't want to minimize it. We understand it is hard. All right, with that disclaimer made, let's start with a brief introduction. We're going to talk about the law of destruction, or like I said, a small part of it. But what is this law? What are we talking about? Let's just talk a little bit about the natural laws or divine laws. In Spiritism, first of all, just to make it clear, we do believe that we have, or that we are, immortal spirits, and that the passing of the body doesn't really end our life. It's just a transformation, a natural transformation that we go through. And in the same way that we have physical laws that govern the behavior of material things, we also have moral laws that govern the relationship between spirits, the relationship between people. Those are the natural laws or divine laws. Both of them are divine laws. Both of them are God's laws. And their purpose is to ensure the happiness of human beings. And right here, I would like to pause for us to absorb this information for a second. God is an ever-caring God. In all laws of nature, the sole purpose of the laws of nature is to ensure the happiness of the creatures of God. That's what we are going to discuss today, right? And like I mentioned, some divine laws govern the movements and relations of raw matter. Others concern human beings themselves, their relations with God, and their fellow human beings. And these are two excerpts of the Spirit's book, one of the basic books of the Spiritist doctrine. There are questions 614 and 617a in particular, right? They're part of the answers for the very, very intriguing questions that Kardec asks to the Spirit when he's putting together this body of knowledge and this doctrine. Sorry. And we're going to investigate some of those questions a little bit deeper now, right? We're going to go into the actual law of destruction. There are other laws. There's the law of progress. There's the law of love. We're going to talk about the law of destruction for a second. And we're going to investigate just a few questions. They have quite a good amount of information for us to go through. But I highly recommend that if you find yourself willing to and you find yourself with time, go through the entire chapter to have a broader understanding of this topic. So in question 737, Kardec asks, what is God's purpose on inflicting destructive scourges upon humankind? So very much direct to the point. Why? Why does this has to happen? Right? Kardec asks very tough questions. And the answer, I'm just going to read the answers and go through some highlights and then discuss a few points for our reflection. To make human beings advance more quickly. As we have already stated, destruction is necessary for the moral regeneration of spirits who move one step closer to perfection in each new existence. We also believe in Spiritism that we have multiple existences, that hence the answer. To appreciate the results, we must consider the purpose or the end. If you only judge them from your personal point of view, they appear to be plagues because of the harm they cause you. Such events are often needed to spur faster development and achieve in only a few years what would otherwise have taken centuries to accomplish. And I would like to highlight a few parts here, right? So the main purpose is for human beings to advance more quickly. But for us to appreciate this, we need to consider the end results. We need to consider the consequences broadly, not just to ourselves. Because maybe we will go through unfortunate times. We might go through uncomfortable times, and it might be worse than just a mere discomfort, of course. But the fact that one individual is being harmed does not mean that in general harm is being done. It doesn't mean that good results are not being created. We have to keep that in mind. That's the first interesting piece of information here. But Kardec is hard to convince, as you will see. In the next question, excuse me, he asks, well, but could God improve humankind by using methods other than destructive scourges? I mean, sure, we understand, but is that all God knows how to do? Destroy everything so that we can improve faster? Certainly not, right? And the answer couldn't be clearer. Yes, and God uses them every day. The Creator has given each of you the means of progressing through the knowledge of good and iniquity, because humans profit so little by those other means. It is necessary to wound their pride and to make them feel their weakness. Now, this is a hard answer for us to take in. So what the spirits are really telling Kardec here is that in the end of the day, God implies other means for our progress every day, all the time. It's all around us in every instant of our existences. But unfortunately, for some strange reason, we don't really profit as much as we could from those means. And for our happiness, for our long-lasting happiness, for a deeper happiness, it becomes necessary for our pride to be wounded. It's not really about attacking our bodies. It's not really about attacking our lives as incarnate human beings here in the material world. It's more about shaking our sense of pride. It's more about surfacing our weaknesses, because maybe we convinced ourselves that we are the kings of the natural world, that we dominated all the physical laws, that we are now invulnerable and superior to everything else. And it's important in any growth process, it's important that we recognize that we have more to learn, that we still have something to improve. And that's not possible if we keep thinking that we are the best thing after sliced bread, right? So it's important for us to recognize our weaknesses. It's important for us to recognize that we became proud or excessively proud of the little knowledge we have the world around us, of the very small amount of control we have on the world around us, so that we can come back to a learning posture, so that we can come back to a learning attitude, right? But Kardec is hard to convince. He keeps asking, good people fall victim to these scourges just as much as bad people do. Is it fair? Excellent question, right? I wouldn't have thought of it myself. And the answer is, on Earth, human beings measure everything against their physical lives. After death, or really the passing of the body, they see things differently and feel that physical life is nothing. A century in your world is but a flash in eternity. Because in Spiritism, we also believe that not only we are immortal spirits, but we are actually eternal and indestructible as spirits. So when we compare that with a couple years, 1 year of one reincarnation, of one physical life, I know it's hard for our minds to grasp that, but this is what the spirits are trying to explain to us, right? A century in your world is but a flash in eternity. Therefore, the suffering of days, months, or even years on earth are of no significance and are only a lesson that will serve you in the future. The spirits are the real world, pre-existent to and surviving everything else. They are God's children and the focus of all divine concern. Come back to the ever-caring God. What is God really worried about? What is God really trying to focus on? And the spirits continue with a very interesting metaphor. Bodies are only the outer shells under which they appear in the physical world, the spirits. When great scourges decimate the human race, the victims are like an army whose clothing is torn, worn out, or lost in battle. A general cares more about his soldiers than their coats. This is a beautiful metaphor, but let's go through some of the highlights of this whole passage, right? So, first of all, God employs other means of improving humankind every day, all the time. So maybe we're just focusing on the disasters, maybe we're just focusing on the destructive scourges, and we're not recognizing the blessings. Maybe something for us to think about. And these disasters, they happen because we need to be wounded on our pride. And we need to remember our weaknesses so that we can keep progressing. And again, because we're incarnated, that's the spirits they're just trying to make us understand that there are other points of view, right? And actually that even our own points of view will be very different after we leave the physical life. We focus too much on the physical life. But after we return to the spiritual condition, to the free spirit condition, we see things in a very different manner. And again, we pre-exist this physical existence, and we will survive this physical existence, as we did through many others. Which means that in this very short period of time, we may be going through a lot of turmoil, but when we are back to our more natural spiritual state, our vision about these experiences is quite different. And we cannot judge our feelings, we cannot judge exactly how we see things right now, unless we try to change our points of view to the point of the immortal spirit. That's what they're trying to teach us here. And then again, God focuses on the spirit. The spirit is eternal. The personality that we are today, that's going to end. The bodies that we use as our means of being in the physical body today, that's going to end. It's going to transform. It's part of the law of destruction. It's going to happen to everyone. Doesn't matter how, it is going to happen. But we, our spiritual selves that went through this very same experience several times, we will survive all of this. And that's the focus of God. The entirety of life, not a single point of experience, right? And in the end, the metaphor, a general doesn't care about the soldier's clothing. The general cares about the people, about the soldier. Did the soldier survive? Is the soldier stronger, more experienced? That's what is important. We can give the soldier a new coat. That's easy. What is really important is for the soldier to be stronger, wiser, and happier. Some of us might think that this is enough. Kardec wouldn't agree. He carries on, but the victims of these calamities are victims nonetheless. It's hard to convince Kardec. And the answer then comes as it's written here. If you viewed life on earth for what it truly is, and as being so small in comparison to infinity, you would attach much less importance to it. These victims will find significant compensation for their pain in another existence, if they bear their suffering with resignation. There's a lot to discuss here, we'll get to it. Whether death is the result of a public disaster or results from an ordinary cause, we are forced to go when the hour of our departure has come. This is a comment from Kardec, right? A little bit of an interpretation to the answer. The only difference is that more such departures occur at the same time in the event of a public disaster. If we could elevate ourselves to contemplate the human race as a whole, the calamities that seem so terrible now would be reduced to passing storms in the destiny of the world. All right, another one that might be a little bit hard to sink into us, but let's start to unravel all of this information. So the first thing, these victims will find significant compensation for their pain in another existence. What are we talking about here? What kinds of compensation are we talking about? Really, the compensation here is the learning. The spirits will become wiser. They will understand their weaknesses. They will understand where they have been excessively proud. And they will understand what are the learnings that they have to go through. By understanding that, they will be able to improve. By improving, they will be more balanced. more resilient, calmer, more understanding, more peaceful, and therefore happier. And that's something that no one can take away from a spirit. That's something that no one can take away from us, because we are the spirits that we're talking about here. And this learning, this improvement in our level of peace, calmness, resilience, that's going to endure for the rest of eternity. It's never going to leave us. But the disaster we went through, that will pass. That will pass. The learning will stay forever. If we suffer the happenings around us with resignation. Why is that? I won't go too much into it, but I want to leave you with a reflection. Can we learn something when we are just complaining? When we are just focusing on our pain? When we are just focusing on the bad things around us? My personal experience, every time I do that, I don't quite get the point of what I'm going through. I don't quite grasp what I could have done better for myself, in my interior, to go through that experience in a more peaceful and balanced way. In Kardec, what I would like to highlight from what Kardec talks about here, that I already talked a little bit about, is that death will come. The destruction of the physical body will come. Death, as we understand it in the common sense way of thinking about it, doesn't really exist, right? Nobody really dies. The physical body ends. It expires one way or another, either in a public disaster or individually. This is unavoidable. So is it that important how it happens? Or is it more important what can we learn from those events? It's maybe another reflection that we can carry with ourselves, right? And you may say, okay, now it's enough, right? No, not really. I would like to discuss one more question with you. The book actually has more than 1,000 questions. I only want to discuss one more before we go into some reflections. And that is, do human beings have the power to avert the terrors that now afflict them? That's a very interesting question, because one thing is, sure, okay, we get it. We have to go through these things to learn and whatnot, but can we avoid them? Is there a way for us to not have to go through it, really? And the answer, again, is extremely interesting. Some of them, but not as is commonly believed. Many of those plagues are the consequence of their lack of foresight, the lack of foresight of human beings, right? Therefore, as they acquire knowledge and experience, they are able to avert them. They can prevent their occurrence when they have determined their cause. Consequently, among the misfortunes that plague humanity, there are some of a general nature that are imposed by God's plans, and the effect of which is felt more or less by each individual. Human beings can do nothing but accept God's will, yet they often aggravate their own pain and suffering due to their negligence. This is very important for us to focus on. What is it that is actually imposed by God? What is it that is the consequence of our negligence? Very important to try to distinguish them. And Kardec comments, destructive calamities with natural causes which are independent of human actions, include epidemics, famines, I think there's a typo here, floods, and weather events that destroy the fruits of the earth. Human beings have used science to discover methods for achieving agricultural improvements through crop rotation, irrigation, the study of hygienic conditions, and the means of offsetting or at least mitigating many of these disasters. Remember, this was written mid-19th century. We're now more than 150 years after this. And our knowledge of science and nature has improved a little bit. Are many countries today not protected from terrible calamities that once devastated them? Imagine what people could accomplish for their physical well-being when they learn to leverage all the resources of their intelligence, and when they add a true sense of charity for the whole human race to their concern for their own self-preservation. Just a parenthesis here. Kardec is not saying that we have to lose our sense of self-preservation. Kardec is saying we have to add a true sense of charity for the whole human race. Now to the highlights. Again, many of those plagues are the consequence of human beings' lack of foresight. Some things are imposed by God, but we often aggravate our pain and suffering due to negligence. Can you imagine? Have you ever seen this happening? Maybe, right? And human beings have used science to discover methods for achieving agricultural improvements through crop rotation and irrigation, the study of hygienic conditions, and the means of offsetting or at least mitigating many of these disasters. And what would we be able to do if we add to that a true sense of charity? Right? Yeah, very well. And we may feel like this is the first time that we go through the things we're going right now, but it's not. There are some particularities to what we're going through. Of course, the world has never been so connected, and therefore, there are some very interesting consequences that we may discuss. For example, would it be the first time that we are looking at such an event of this type, of this kind of natural disaster? We're looking at it as one single humanity? Certainly it's the first time we're disconnected when this happened, and other epidemics happened before, but now we have the opportunity to actually not only understand that we've been a little bit too proud about how much control we have over nature, and that maybe we should look a little bit more carefully to our weaknesses, but we can also use this moment to reflect on how we are all human beings. We go through the same pains. We have the same vulnerabilities. And if we live in a different part of the globe, or if we happen to have a different ethnical origin or a different sexual orientation, it doesn't matter so much. We go through the same pains. We have the same vulnerabilities. We are all human beings. And we're going through this with our individual experiences, but we are all going through this, right? And we can actually, if we go to the Spiritist review, I'm just going to briefly mention two passages of the Spiritist review from November 1968 about the Mauritius Island epidemic. This epidemic had been happening in the island for 2 years, I believe. This is the last year of the epidemic. And there's two interesting sentences that I would like to bring for our reflection here. There's much more. The Spiritist Review was a periodic magazine that was edited by Kardec in his time, which worked, for all intents and purposes, it worked as any other scientific periodic that we have today, right? So, just for our reflection, two comments from the spirits. Like Kardec received 2 letters from the Mauritius Island, and he posts the letters in the Spiritist Review, and then some comments from the spirits, right? The people are reporting their situation and how they are going. They're giving some testimony of their faith. But then I got these few sentences out of the spirit's comments. Health is the result of the balance of natural forces. If an epidemic disease devastates some place, it cannot be anything other than the consequences of the rupture of this balance. This is my own translation. I didn't find an official translation for this passage. And the other is, the persistence of evil should determine the serious research of its source. And we can again reflect. Is there any imbalance of natural forces that we can recognize on what we're going through? Are we trying to determine the source of what is happening to us? Get a little bit into that, but I'll mostly leave it to your own reflection. And when you're looking at information about what we're going through, when you're questioning yourself and the world around you, why is this happening? Maybe we can keep those things in mind, on top of everything else that we already talked about, of course. And now I want to move on to a few other reflections, right? A few things that we may want to consider when we see this kind of information being brought to us. And we get back to the idea of an ever-caring God. In the world we live in, we have natural phenomena and we have human action. And there's a relationship between them. It's extremely important for us to recognize what are natural phenomena, what is human action, how are they combining to give us the experiences that we go through in our everyday lives. How are they combined on an individual level? What are we doing? Are we washing our hands? What are we doing as a civilization? Are we paying attention to where we should employ our resources as a civilization to avoid these kinds of situations? After all, the spirits made it very clear, it is avoidable. A lot of it is avoidable. Which brings us back to a reflection about knowledge and free will. We may have the knowledge to avoid the suffering and the pain, but do we really want to? Or are we maybe paying attention to other things that distract us, things that we find a little bit more interesting than employing our knowledge and resources to avoid an aggravation of our pain and suffering? And how can we individually, maybe just a grasp of how can we individually go through these kinds of events, big or small really, with a little bit more peace in our hearts? Can we have a change in our point of view? Can we change our mindsets a little bit to find a strength, to go through the normal things that are a part of the existence in the physical world? We should very much reflect on those points. It might seen a lot of times that we have absolutely no control over what happens around us. But we can have a lot of control on what happens inside of us. And it might make all the difference. And in particular, in this point of natural phenomena versus human action, knowledge and free will, I would like to bring to you a scientific article from 2007 called Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus as an Agent of Emerging and Re-emerging Infection. Published by Chinese scientists. And in the conclusion, they make a very strong statement. The article, of course, to be honest, most of it is beyond my understanding. But I think the conclusion here, this piece that I brought up, is very clear. And I'll read it for our benefit. Coronaviruses are well known to undergo genetic recombination, which may lead to new genotypes and outbreaks. The presence of a large reservoir of SARS-CoV-like viruses on horseshoe bats, together with the culture of eating exotic mammals in southern China, is a time bomb. The possibility of the reemergence of SARS and other novel viruses from animals or laboratories, and therefore the need for preparedness, should not be ignored. Natural phenomena versus human action. Knowledge and free will. And here we are today. And we may be thinking, why is God doing this to me? Or maybe we're questioning those religious people. They say that God is good, but look at what's happening. But in reality, God is employing all sorts of means for our progress. Mostly through knowledge, through charity, through love. But for some reason, 13 years ago, as a civilization, I don't want for not even a brief moment put this responsibility on an individual people or an individual country, but as a civilization, our focus was not on this warning. We focused on other things. Not all of us. Some of us actually focused on the warnings. In some countries, the disaster is smaller. The pain is smaller. The suffering is not this big. But enough with that. Let's go through some more reflections, right? In these types of times that we are going through, now that we are here, we can certainly take some things out of it. We can grow. As we endure times like this, we certainly grow. We can change our priorities. We can reevaluate our view of the world. We can reevaluate our view on technology, on connecting with other human beings. We can exercise our resignation. Since we are here and there's a lot that we cannot really do to change what we're going through, can we endure it? Can we go through it peacefully? We can pray. We can pray to gather strength. We can pray so that the higher spirits, God, will help us through this time, will help us take the best out of it. And this is very important because prayer is the consent of the soul. Of course, God knows we need help. Of course. God is ready to help all the time and is helping. But God will never trespass our free wills. The ever-caring God will never commit the act of violence that would be going against our free wills. We need to give consent. And it's the same thing with the good higher spirits that have the intent to help us. And in the end of the day, we have to remember that this is just the journey of immortal spirits. Another step in the journey of forever learning, forever improving, getting closer and closer to a more peaceful and fulfilling state of being as spirits. And of course, as we improve as spirits, we also bring this to our new experiences on earth. And as time passes by, the suffering that we are going through will be compensated in future existences because we learned, we grew, we're more resignated. We learn how to give the consent of the soul for higher beings to be on our side when we need the most. And with that, I would like to say thank you and get this short talk to a closure.